First, just say your name so everybody knows how to pronounce them correctly when they're editing their own questions.
Bruce Sinofsky.
And my name is Joe Berlinger.
Before filming, was there no way to expect all the... Well, before filming, there was no way to expect all the drama that ensued of the period of time that the band was making St. Anger CD. So can you give us a synopsis of what your original idea was?
Sure. I mean, you know, as with all great nonfiction journeys that we've done with all of our films, like Brothers Keeper of Paradise Lost, we never know what the outcome's going to be, and the magic happens, you know, in front of the cameras. We actually went to San Francisco thinking we were going to make a little promo film. We were going to shoot the making of an album and hand it off to the record label, and 6 months later, you know, walk away and be done with it. I mean, then all this stuff started happening, and a lot of shit happened.
You know, when we went in there, you know, we had a relationship with the band because of Paradise Lost, and they're letting us use their music in the film, and that's why the relationship had developed. But when we went into the first day of filming, and you see the baddest heavy metal band of all time sitting in a therapy session, I mean, we knew that something could happen, something different was about to unfold in front of us, and we really didn't know exactly how far it was going to go, because it could have been 2 weeks of therapy and that would have been it. But the fact that it went on for over 2 years was fascinating to us. And, you know, like Joe said, you don't want to know where the film goes. And that made it an interesting journey for Joe and I.
Can you give people a brief synopsis of what they will see when they go to theaters in July?
Well, I mean, you're going to see the icons of macho aggression getting in touch with their feelings, getting in touch with each other. I mean, basically the film witnesses the breakdown of a band. The band nearly disintegrated. I don't think people realize just how close these guys came to flaming out. None of them were talking to each other. There was a lot of tension that had built up over the 20 years, and they brought a therapist in initially just to sort of navigate the Jason Newsted situation. Jason had announced his departure, and I think management brought some guy in to have the guys talk it through to see if there's any way of salvaging it. But Metallica had a real need to talk for the first time with each other, and they really cleaved to this therapist, and they went through a lot of shit. You see Hetfield going into rehab. You see Ulrich and Hetfield working out some of their stuff together like you've never seen in a movie before. I mean, it's the most intimate inside look of any band that's ever been put on film. And it's a very honest film. I mean, I'm so proud that these guys let us put this out there, because it's not all pretty. There's some really ugly moments. There's some really embarrassing moments. Ultimately, it's a very heroic portrait of these guys. But even if you're not a Metallica fan, I think you will dig the total inside access. I mean, beyond anything that's ever been put on film, in my opinion.
I like to call it "Let It Be with Balls," because it's so revealing. And what's so refreshing about Some Kind of Monster is you see these guys as us. You know, that James, Lars, Kirk, and ultimately Rob are no different than we are. Just because they have, you know, a bankroll that we all, believe me, don't have, they still have the same problems at home. They have the same problems with child rearing, same problems with, you know, interpersonal relationships at home with their wives, partnerships. They have all the same problems that we have. And the film's very democratized. You see these guys no differently than you see your partners at work, your best buddies, your parents. And that's why it's so special, you know, this film, because it's not just about a heavy metal band. It's not a concert film. It's a film about relationships, and it was a really great honor for us to make this film.
I mean, that's actually a key point. Is it's not a concert film. I mean, in fact, the first time the band takes the stage is the end credit roll. We like to say, or I guess our mantra in the editing room is, our film begins where all concert films are. I just
actually.
What do we say, Bruce?
Our film ends where all other concert films begin.
No, I think it's the other way. Our film ends.
No, because our film ends where other films begin.
Yes.
So you aren't going to be sitting there listening to this band on
Our
stage.
film ends where most concert films begin, and we see all the stuff that leads up to people taking the stage publicly.
Concert films are a dime a dozen.
Any
good filmmaker with 6 cameras can capture a concert.
We did much, much more.
Tell me about the Metallica fan that's inside both of you before the making of Some Kind of Monster.
Well, honestly, I don't think we were really Metallica fans. I mean, this whole thing started. We obviously are Metallica fans now, but I would say I'm more fans of them as human beings. I love their music, but their music didn't rock my world prior to making this movie. I mean, honestly, we made a film about 3 teenagers in Arkansas called Paradise Lost. These 3 teens were accused of murder of these 3 8-year-old boys in some devil-worshipping ceremony. It was totally bogus. The whole point of the film is that these 3 kids were railroaded in this Bible-thumping part of the world because, God forbid, they wore black T-shirts, wore pentagrams and listened to Metallica music. And the Metallica lyrics were actually introduced into the trial as key evidence that these guys are devil worshippers. Now, obviously, there is a satanic side to some metal music, but Metallica music has nothing to do with Satanism, and it's totally absurd that these lyrics were actually introduced into trial. And so we wanted to use Metallica music in our film, and we contacted their management thinking, Metallica would never even know about our film, our previous work, or they wouldn't care. They would charge us a lot of money, but they were incredible gentlemen, and they let us use the music for free. They were very proud of the association with Paradise Lost, and that sort of started a friendship. And we were amazed that what their onstage persona is and who they are in real life. That started a fascination with us, and all of our films are about breaking down stereotypes, and we just felt that if we could break through that and hang out with these guys and let people see who they really are, it would be fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan now, but I'd say back then, no. I mean, I'm a sort of traditional Beatles, Who, Stones, sort of classic rock and roll fan. My son, who was 12 at the time, Alex, was listening to Metallica, and I asked him, did he have any Metallica music that was mostly instrumental? So we ended up with Call of Cthulhu and Sanitarium and what was the other? Orion.
Well, Sanitarium we had to use because that was the song that was introduced into trial, the lyrics to Sanitarium, as proof that Damien Eccles, who's still rotting in jail, by the way, about to be executed for something he didn't do. That's the song that was evidence that these guys were killers, which is just such a joke.
Now he's 20 and at college and into some heavy rap music.
Your son,
I think he
your
left.
son,
Yeah,
not Damien Eccles.
Not Damien. I don't know what Damien's listening to in jail.
Besides the end product, the documentary, were there any materialistic perks to the Some Kind of Monster project?
Only free guitar picks.
Well, the great thing about this movie is it's the first movie Bruce and I have made where there weren't dead bodies and people grieving to the degree that we have dealt with in the past. So this film was actually a lot of fun to make. Hitting the road with these guys was an incredible experience. Getting an true insider's view to their world, just how big they are. Learning a lot about music. I have modest amount of musical knowledge, but spending 2 years in the studio with Metallica, I really now truly and deeply understand how they make their music, what it's all about. It was a great education. And these guys, the stereotype that these guys knock things out in 24 hours and are there to, make money, and it's a total joke. I mean, these guys work their asses off, and they're in a position, they're pretty, there's no surprise that they're wealthy guys. If I had half their money, I would be checking out of life and just enjoying myself. And these guys work really, really hard, and they really want to be their best. And
and one of the things that was a byproduct of the therapy sessions for Joe and I is that we couldn't help but see that Lars and James were going through some similar things that the two of us were going through, because we've been working together for 15 years, and we were having some growing pains. And Joe had gone off to do a feature film, and I went off to do this film on Sun Records for PBS, and we hadn't worked together in a while, and there was some tension, and like these guys, who gets the credit? Why, what does Joe actually do? What does Bruce actually do? And there was some
petty shit
that was going on. And after these therapy sessions would be over, Joe and I would go back to our hotel room, not with Phil, their therapist, but we would sit down in our hotel room and work out some of the issues that we had been sort of stuck in the back of our bellies for a couple of years. And we grew together as filmmakers and as friends. We'd always been great friends, but even closer now. And their management says that the therapy they went through probably gave Metallica another 10 years, and probably did the same for Joe and I. So one of the things we got out of it is a new understanding of each other and the way we work together.
And an appreciation for the collaborative process. You take Lars Ulrich, an upper middle class Dane, living a very different kind of a lifestyle than James Hetfield, a Southern Cal tough guy You know, you throw those two guys together, two guys who probably, if they were met in high school and didn't have a musical interest, would never be friends, you know, would be such different kinds of people. You throw them together and you have a musical revolution, and you can't really understand why. And I think one of the things Bruce and I learned is that sometimes you can't quantify or precisely analyze what two people or four people bring to a collaboration. And I think what we forgot in our you know, in our own little way, in our genre, we've been pretty successful. And I think when you're successful like that, you sort of forget what the magic is. And for whatever reason, when Bruce and I come together, as Bruce likes to say, the film gods sort of tap us on the shoulder. And I think making this, being apart for a bit and then making this film together and listening to these guys go through these struggles made us realize that for whatever reason, when Bruce and I come together, you know, some magical stuff happens on film. And
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What does your lifestyle determine?
It determines my death style.
Oh, just wondering.
I got the feeling that in the beginning of Some Kind of Monster that the therapist was just a therapist. Then near the end, he loved hanging out with Metallica so much, he almost felt like he was part of the band or he was the fifth horseman.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is about Phil, I mean, first of all, Phil's presence in Metallica's world made the difference. If Phil was not there, if the therapy hadn't happened, I really think the band would have been toast. He gave the guys the ability to communicate. However, his chosen method was also his Achilles heel. He considers himself a performance enhancement coach as opposed to a pure therapist. And in his mind, being a performance enhancement coach means you can get emotionally involved with your subjects. A therapist traditionally is supposed to draw a line and not get involved with his subjects emotionally. And he became really attached to these guys, and it became a life-transforming experience for him having these guys as clients. And I think he didn't really know when it was time to stop. And I think that was his Achilles heel, but I still believe the band appreciates what he did, and the film demonstrates that he made the difference. But as in any healthy relationship where there's one person in a superior position of authority, like parent, student, you know, or student, teacher, parent, son, that type of thing, therapist, patient, you know, at some point, as part of the healing process, you got to stand on your own 2 feet. And I think Phil wanted more out of the relationship, and Metallica, in order to grow and be whole, had to push him away. That doesn't mean they don't still love him. That doesn't mean they don't appreciate what he did. But I think Phil wanted to continue, and they felt like they needed to move on.
Believe me, being inside the inner sanctum, you know, being at HQ, sitting down and having breakfast with them and hanging out and talking, and playing ping pong, and, you know, just really getting to know them as people. When you weren't filming, it's very cool. Believe me, any Metallica fan in their you know, would give their left nut to spend a day with the band. In fact, many of them have.
Can we say nut on radio?
I see it. Well, you said shit.
I know, so but I was thinking it was going to get blipped.
Well, probably. Well, yeah, it's on tape, so they'll blip it. But, you know, even for us, you know, it was a lot of fun. But after our 2.5 year, I don't call it sentence, but after our 2.5 years with the band, we were ready to move on to something else. As exciting as it was, you know, Phil just loved it, probably more than we did on many levels, because I think there's an interaction he was having with the band. And seeing the success, I think he wanted more success, not just more of the band. But he did have plans for each of them individually, and, you know, it just reached a point where they were ready to fly on their own. And they
should have, and they do.
But he's still part of their family. When you're part of Metallica's family, whether you're a fan or whether you get into that inner sanctum, it's you're touched with a sword, like being, you know, with the Queen of England. You're knighted for life, and there's a bond that you have and feel. And I can't say I've ever felt that with anybody else musically. That we've filmed, whether it be for a day, when we filmed the Who for a day, and their very last performance together before Entwistle died. We were doing a promotional thing for them at Pete's studio in London, and then 2 weeks later, you know, on the eve of their last tour, he died in Las Vegas. So we actually were from here to you, which is very close, seeing their last performance together, which was absolutely an amazing thing. But I never felt like I was ever part of anything. I think they were happy to have us there, but really happy to see us leave. And Metallica always sort of said, you know, we don't really notice you when you're here. We notice you when you're not here, which was a real compliment to the way that we work. with our crew.
It was, you know, it was so interesting watching them hit the road again and realize what a special experience we had because, you know, there were no barriers. We were there nonstop. We had free access. I mean, we didn't abuse it, but not once in 2.5 years did they tell us, you know, don't come in here, don't film that. We just became part of the family. And then it was interesting. I had a very metaphorical moment when I was on the road with them. I went to see them in Oslo because I'm actually writing a book about the experience, which is coming out in November. And I had done my interviews at the hotel with them about the book. I wanted just one last interview, their feelings about the film, and then I went to the show, and I had forgotten to get my all-access pass, which I've gotten dozens of times. And I was walking backstage, and I saw James. I was talking with James, and then they headed backstage, and a guard stops me, and I didn't have my pass, and those guys kept walking on, and they started hassling me. And I could have said, well, wait a second, hey, James, or run to the production office and gotten but you know what, I just felt like, you know what, the experience is over. They're now in that world. We've had our time. The doors have shut. And I just sort of let that be sort of my magic ending moment that, you know, I'm being stopped. I can't go backstage anymore. Technically, I could if I really wanted to, but it just was this sort of very poetic moment. And those guys just sort of walked into the distance. And now they're once again, they're rock stars. For the 2.5 years we were with them, they were just regular guys. And they gave us this incredible access.
You know, we had to let go, too. You know, the experience of making the film was great. Having that kind of access, always being in the inner sanctum was great, but it reaches a point where they have to say, all right, boys, we're moving on. It's time for you guys to move. As it turns out, our moving on is helping to distribute the movie, you know, that opens around the country. We opened theatrically in New York and San Francisco July 9th, and then it moves across the country through November. So, you know, we're expecting the Metallica Nation to really come out in force, especially on those first weekends, because we've got to prove to the world that people are going to love this film and embrace the film, and can't show the world unless you come out that Friday and Saturday and Sunday. So.
Yeah, there are a lot of naysayers in the business who think that a music film isn't going to do big business, you know, but we think this is an incredibly special film. It's targeted as much to non-fans as it is to fans, but if you're a fan of Metallica, you got to come out those first couple of weekends so that this movie stays on screen.
We will prove them wrong, these naysayers.
Look at you guys. You weren't that big Metallica fans, and then all of a sudden, because that's what they asked me after the movie. They said, "All right, what did you like about it? Did you think non-Metallica fans will like it?" And you're a prime example. You're a perfect example of that.
Totally. I mean, well, what I think people will respond to in the movie is the fact that you get a deep understanding of the creative process. You get a deep understanding of human potential and human growth. I mean, I think the film is actually, as silly as this sounds, it's a very spiritual film about human growth and creative potential, and how do you work with people, and how do you stay on top of your game? You know, it's in many ways it's a template for people my age in their early 40s. We all have to grow and mature, and Metallica is now 40 and they have kids, and they're different people, and the fans who may oh my God, what wimps, they went into therapy. Well, let me tell you something. It takes a hell of a lot of strength to confront your problems and deal with it. More strength than most people have to not only confront your problems head on, but to let two guys film it and then put it out for the world. I mean, for the book interview, the thing that James told me that was so just really moving. He said that he says it in the film too, but he has always had a tough time communicating with people. He's always had a tough time letting people know who he really is. And this film, even though it wasn't planned this way, because no one ever planned this film to be that big, no one planned for James to go into rehab. However, in hindsight now, he loves having this film because it allows him to let his fans know who he really is. He felt chained by the image of the frontman of Metallica, and now there's something out there to let people know who James Hetfield really is. And as he says, if people want to stomp all over that image, that's their prerogative, but this is who I am. And it takes an incredible amount of strength and confidence to allow that image to be put out there. So people grow and change. Metallica has grown and changed musically, and if you're a true fan, you're going to stick with these guys and embrace their change and hopefully change yourself.
You know, when you think about it, wouldn't it have been pretty amazing if other groups in the past had gone through therapy or done something therapeutic to help themselves, like Creedence, the Police, the Beatles, to name a few? Maybe some of those people would have been able to work out some of their differences and actually stayed and performed, you know, for a bit longer. I would have loved to have seen a Beatle album in 1972. You know, that would have been something quite magical for me. But the fact that these guys did it, the first, maybe there's somebody else that has done it, but the first ones to expose themselves.
I don't think to this degree ever.
To expose themselves to the world. Especially, you know, we're not talking about John Denver or some folk singer. We're talking about the biggest heavy band of all time. And this is the last thing you would have expected from them. But after you get to know them, you can understand why they did it, because they're some of the ballsiest guys I've ever met.
And their music is still aggressive as hell. I mean, Saint Anger is a really aggressive album, and you know, it just shows you can get in touch with who you are and not have it affect your work, you know, or inspire your work, make it better.
And for those who didn't embrace Saint Anger, because there's always this knee-jerk reaction to their music, partially because of Napster, partially because they said they never do a video, and they did a video. So the yin and the yang. If you go on these websites, who goes on a website to just spew venom and anger unless you secretly love that person or love that group? So any of those people who sort of like to kick Metallica in the ass, I challenge you to go see this movie. And then you can get in touch with me or Joe. There's easy ways to find us. We have our own website. What is it called?
www.somekindofmonster.com.
So you could get in touch with us that way. And then if you still feel that way about Metallica, I'll respect it. But I can promise you, 90% of you will have a different opinion about the band after you see this movie.
Now, I may be being presumptuous here, but...
Yes, you are.
I'm hoping there's going to be a DVD eventually. And when that does come out, will there be a blooper reel? Will there be outtakes?
Oh, my God.
What was cut from the movie, if there are outtakes on the cutting room floor?
This is going to be the most massive DVD ever in history. You know, there was a point where the record label came swooping in when we were making this film, because initially the record label was paying for it as a piece of promo. And when they saw it, we kept telling them, this is not a promo, this is really some special stuff happening. And so Elektra ultimately said, okay, guys, we want to take your documentary. We agree it's special. We want to turn it into a reality show. And they were going to shove it on VH1 as some cheesy Ozzy ripoff, 6 hours, each hour dropping 6 weeks before before the album was released, and then the final episode would come on the day of the album and do this overt cheesy thing. And the other thing Metallica did was, when they heard that, they stood up to their record label, told them to go take a hike, handed them a check for $4 million and said, you know what, we're going to pay for this thing now. Go away, Elektra. We don't want some cheesy reality show. We're Metallica. We don't need an album. We don't need a TV show to set up our album. And we believe in what these guys are doing. And if it takes them another 3 years to make this film, we want them to make it the way they want to make it. I mean, how many filmmakers have that kind of an experience? But because we had started off at one point being pressured to cut a TV show, we have a lot of scenes that would have made it into a TV show.
We shot 1,600 hours.
Right, we shot 1,600 hours. We have a 4.5 hour reel of finished scenes that didn't make it into the movie, and probably half of that is going to make it into this massive DVD with a ton of extras. There's a lot of great stuff that didn't make it into the film.
And the idea of a 6-hour puke fest is good for Britney Spears. I just read that she wants to do a 6-hour, like sort of a Madonna, truth or dare thing. Can you imagine 6 hours of that puke dribbling out of her? God help us.
If it's X-rated, sure.
Yeah, right. If it's X-rated, maybe.
Tell us about how you came up with the movie title, Some Kind of Monster.
That's one of the songs on the album, and they spent a lot of time at the beginning in the Presidio working on that song, and then it was interesting to see how they came up with that particular name. They said, well, it's kind of about Frankenstein and pieces, and then James says, well, like some kind of monster, and it just worked very well for us to have that, be one of the early sequences in the film, and Metallica is a monster. The business is a monster. They're a monster band. It just felt right.
It just became very. It was one of those titles that came to us very early in the game.
We were battling. We were debating between that and Britney. right? Britney or Some Kind of Monster, and we stuck with Some Kind of Monster.
You know, Some Kind of Monster came to us very early in the game. It just became metaphoric for James's struggles, for their huge success, for the tension between Lars and James. It was, of course, quite literal, the first song that they really worked out in the Presidio. You know, James himself says Metallica has been a beast and it has sucked a lot of me into it, and that's what he was fighting in his rehab. It just works on so many levels.
Were you worried at times that the filming was or would get in the way of making Saint Anger? I mean, was there at any point that you guys wanted to pull back out of respect for the band, or?
Well, you know, there is a moment in the film when James came back and Joe and I are talking to them about whether the film should continue and whether if our presence was getting in the way and impeding their creative juices, that we were willing to leave and stop the process. I mean, Joe says, you know what, if it means stopping making the movie, then we'll do that. But we have a very small crew. It was our DP, Bob Richmond, a sound guy, Mike Emery, and Joe and I. And that's really about it. And we were very respectful. In fact, we became invisible. That's when James said, we don't notice you when you're here, only when you're not here, that we realized that we had reached, you know, the right sort of invisibility for them, where we weren't getting in the way of the process.
Well, I actually believe that, you know, there are times when the camera is not just an observer, but it's a cathartic device. And Lars has actually said that the presence of the cameras actually helped the therapy, and that if there was no cameras there, they would have bullshitted each other. They wouldn't have been truthful with each other. And the fact that, you know, there were some filmmakers that they respected hanging around, it made them be honest. So and I believe the therapy healed them and kept them together as a band. And I think so much of Saint Anger is about their experiences that grew out of getting to know each other again. And so therefore, I think there's a direct line between the presence of the cameras actually having a direct impact on the quality of the music and what the music turned out to be.
Tell us about the Dave Mustaine-Lars meeting, because everybody wants to know about that. I mean, why wasn't James there? Give us some details.
Okay, well, the Mustaine thing happened actually on September 13th, 2001. I was stranded in San Francisco. Dave Mustaine was stranded in San Francisco. Mustaine called Lars up, and they decided to have a meeting. Lars told me it was happening. We met at the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton. I explained to Dave what we were doing. He was a little freaked out, and I said, look, this is what's happening. We'd love to film it. Anytime you don't want to be filmed, we'll shut the cameras off. You know, honestly, I think if it hadn't been 9/11 and, you know, we were all in a very soul-searching kind of a mood, we were all like freaked out, we were all stranded, a lot of us thought the world was really a very different place that week. So I think Dave was very open to the meeting and very open to the filming. I think if it happened 2 years later, that scene wouldn't have happened. I wasn't supposed to have been in San Francisco. You know, I was scheduled to go home. So there's a lot of fortuitousness in that scene. And, you know, there were 3 times during that scene where he asked us to turn the cameras off because it got really emotional. But he was very open to it. You know, subsequently, he has poo-pooed the movie, and I don't think he's actually seen the full movie. I
don't think so.
But he has, gone on record saying that he doesn't like the scene, doesn't like his portrayal, which I find very quizzical because I think he comes across as, he does have a bit of a jerky reputation in the business, and I think in this scene he comes across as very sympathetic, very human. I mean, my God, here's a guy who, by any measure of success, has been incredibly successful, and yet the long shadow of Metallica is still cast over him, and he still feels he doesn't measure up to these guys, and he still pines for the day where, he could still be part of Metallica. I find that very poignant. But he was a gentleman, then, and allowed us to film it. And then in fact, I sent him the scene when we were wrapping the movie because I wanted to get some archival footage of Megadeth to fill out that scene so that people who aren't Metallica fans would understand who Megadeth was. I didn't think he'd have any problem with the scene being in the movie because he had agreed to do it. And at that point, I found out from his managers that he wants the scene out of the film and wants nothing to do with it and thinks it's a bad portrayal, which sort of surprised me because I think he comes across as very human. In fact, we have shown this movie to a lot of Metallica fans and a lot of Metallica fans who think Dave's a jerk. And at the end of those screenings, everybody has such compassion and respect and a changed view of who Mustaine is. It's too bad that Dave doesn't recognize that this is a very positive portrayal of him, and I wish he'd go see the movie because I know
he will.
I think all he has seen is the scene, and I think out of context maybe it freaked him out a little bit.
And James was in rehab at the time. That's why he wasn't there.
Right, James was in rehab.
How was Jason Newsted when you approached him to be a part of Some Kind of Monster?
Very easy. We've known him since '96, and I think he felt that this was an avenue because he trusted us and liked us very much, to be able to tell his point of view and to be very candid and honest. And, he knew that we weren't going to, sort of blindside him either, because that's not the way we make films. And so anytime we called him up and said, we'd like to talk to you or we'd like to film you, which we did 2 or 3 times, he says, just name the time and the place. And he couldn't have been a better friend about it, even a better bandmate, even though he wasn't in Metallica anymore. He felt like, this was part of the film, and he was part of the Metallica's past, and he wanted to have his say, which we certainly gave him. He's a great guy. He really is.
Seeing yourself on the big screen, James actually said it was like a mirror for him. I mean, especially in the documentary sense. You see a side of yourself that others usually see, and then you never see. How do you think Some Kind of Monster changed each band member or the band itself?
That's a good question.
I think they learned a lot about each other. I mean, here are guys who have never spoken to...
And about themselves.
Yeah, I think these are guys who have never really spoken to each other about their feelings. And I think one of the most magical moments that Bruce and I had in this whole experience was sitting in a screening room watching these guys watch the film for the first time. I mean, in the 2.5 years we filmed, they never asked us what to film. They never controlled things. There was never an agenda. They rarely saw footage. And so 2.5 years later, in the September of 2003, as we were gunning for a deadline of submitting this film to the Sundance Film Festival, we got them into a screening room. It was actually George Lucas's private screening room at Skywalker Ranch because somebody in Metallica is friends with George Lucas, Marin County, blah, blah, blah. And they each sat in different corners of the screening room, and Bruce and I kept, craning our necks and looking to see their reactions, and they were laughing and cringing but you could just feel that they were learning so much about each other and their relationships with each other. And in a weird way too, we became a conduit of information, which is a line we don't normally like to cross. But when they heard that we filmed Jason, they wanted to know what Jason said, and when we were with Jason, Jason wanted to know what Metallica had said about certain issues.
It's kind of like Paradise Lost,
Yeah, but we had to be a little more careful in Paradise Lost because we were getting confidential
you're dealing with
information.
a murder case, but you got both sides trying to pump you for little bits of information.
Yeah, but I think in this instance we let a little information out where we in Paradise Lost. I think we were a little more careful.
Yes, we were.
But I just think these guys learned so much about each other by watching the film.
It's an interesting thing is that Cliff Bernstein, who's their manager, said that when the band in the future gets out of whack, he's going to make them sit down and watch the film because he feels is a great life lesson that can be relearned in case they start reverting back to like past behaviors. And that's a huge compliment too because he sees it as therapeutic. So hopefully the band won't need that, but it's there in case they do.
All right, last question. What surprised you the most about the band or maybe an individual member?
Well, I would say the entire band allowing all of this stuff to just hang out, not controlling or manipulating us in the least. Ultimately, they were paying for the movie, and you would never know it. Bruce and I have done a bunch of films, and in every other film that we've ever done, even if it is our film, quote unquote, we've had to deal with notes from executives and people telling us things. These guys treated us like total artists, even though they were paying the bills, let us make the movie we wanted to make, looked at it, and said, okay, cool. I mean, that takes balls confidence, trust, and respect. And those are things that a lot of people rag on Metallica as not having, and that's just totally ridiculous. These guys are incredibly cool, incredibly talented, incredibly respectful to other artists, and they have earned my undying fanhood as a result.
I think for me it was, in dealing with James, is that the first time I ever met James was at a concert at the Continental Arena in New Jersey. And I wanted to thank him for letting us use the music we used in Paradise Lost. And he just come off stage and he was talking to some biker guy. And I walked over. I was invited by Skylar and Kirk and Lars. And I walked up to him. He couldn't have been a bigger asshole. I mean, I despised him that day. I thought he was about the biggest ass that ever lived. And then, you know, we'd see him periodically over time, and nothing he said or did changed that feeling until we started actually doing the filming. And when he came back from rehab, by the time we'd been together for a couple of years, he actually was willing to show the gentle side of him, the human side, let us inside his life. And that was very I embraced him as a person there. And I never thought that would come about. I figured he was going to remain an ass, you know, through my whole experience with him. And by the time, I really felt like we were brothers, you know, that there was a relationship, and that I really appreciated.